Picture this. You are standing in a basement beneath the British Museum in London at 3:30 in the morning. The air tastes of dust and forgotten centuries. Your flashlight cuts through absolute darkness, illuminating row after row of wooden crates stretching into what feels like infinity. Each crate bears the same haunting label in faded black ink: Mesopotamian tablets. Translation pending. The date stamps read 1953. That was over 70 years ago. Your footsteps echo against concrete floors as you move deeper into this forbidden archive. The beam of your light dances across 40,000 cuneiform tablets. Maybe more. Nobody has bothered to count them recently. These clay fragments hold secrets that someone, somewhere, decided the world was not ready to know. The silence down here is not peaceful. It is heavy with the weight of suppressed knowledge. You run your fingers along the edge of one crate, feeling splinters of wood that have been undisturbed for decades. Inside, wrapped in yellowing tissue paper, lies a piece of baked clay no bigger than your palm. Wedge-shaped marks cover its surface, like tiny bird tracks in mud. But these are not random scratches. They are words. They are sentences. They are stories that challenge everything we think we know about the beginning of human civilization. The contradiction that should keep you awake at night is this. We live in an age where we can translate dead languages from around the world in real time using phone apps, yet tens of thousands of tablets from humanity's earliest known civilization sit untranslated in museum basements across the globe. Not because we lack the skill, not because we lack the technology, but because someone made a decision that these particular tablets should remain silent. Now, before we go deeper into this rabbit hole, let me introduce myself. I am Mr. H, and you have stumbled into something that most people spend their entire lives never knowing exists. If you are using this to fall asleep, perfect. That is exactly why I make these videos. Dim your screen, close your eyes, and let me take you on a journey through the hidden corridors of human history. Hit that subscribe button and drop a comment telling me where you are listening from and what time it is. I love knowing that we are exploring these mysteries together. No matter what corner of the world you are in, what you are about to discover will change how you see the story of civilization itself. But fair warning, once you know these things, you cannot unknow them. Some knowledge has a way of following you into your dreams, back to that basement. The British Museum is not the only institution hiding these ancient voices. In 1873, Sir Henry Rawlinson led an excavation team in Baghdad. They were digging through the ruins of ancient Babylon when they uncovered something that should have rewritten every history textbook. Tablets describing beings who came from the sky. Not gods in the mythological sense, but actual beings with detailed descriptions of their technology, their knowledge, and their interactions with early humans. Rawlinson was no amateur archaeologist. He was the man who had successfully deciphered the Behistun inscription, unlocking the Rosetta Stone of cuneiform writing. His team could read these tablets perfectly well. What they found was terminology that sounded disturbingly like genetic manipulation, descriptions of breeding programs, technical specifications for devices that would not be invented for thousands of years, mathematical formulas that modern scientists are still trying to understand. So what did Rawlinson do with this earth-shattering discovery? He classified the entire collection as mythological nonsense and shipped them back to London, where they joined thousands of other similarly problematic tablets in basement storage. Career preservation trumped human curiosity. The truth was too dangerous for Victorian sensibilities, but the suppression did not stop there. In the 1920s, while the world was dancing through the Jazz Age, the Vatican was quietly purchasing private collections of Mesopotamian tablets from dealers across the Middle East. Over 15,000 tablets disappeared into the sub-basement archives of Vatican City, where they were catalogued in ledgers that the public will never see. The Catholic Church, an institution not typically known for its interest in ancient Mesopotamian literature, suddenly became the world's largest private collector of cuneiform tablets. Think about that for a moment. Why would an organization dedicated to preserving Christian doctrine spend enormous sums of money acquiring ancient clay tablets from Iraq? What did they know that made these particular artifacts worth hiding away forever? The pattern becomes impossible to ignore when you start looking for it. The Smithsonian Institution in Washington houses thousands of tablets that have never been publicly translated. The Louvre in Paris has entire rooms of Mesopotamian artifacts that scholars are not permitted to study. The Iraq Museum in Baghdad, before it was looted during the American invasion, had a restricted that even Iraqi archaeologists could not access without special government permission. You start to realize that this is not accidental neglect. This is systematic suppression. Professional Assyriologists, the scholars who specialize in reading cuneiform, face a career-ending choice when they encounter these controversial tablets: translate them honestly and watch their academic reputation crumble, or stay silent and keep their tenure. Dr. Zechariah Sitchin learned this lesson the hard way when he published his translations of tablets describing the Anunnaki. The academic establishment destroyed his credibility so thoroughly that most people today dismiss his work without ever reading it. But here is what they do not want you to know. Some of these tablets contain technological diagrams that should not exist. Metallurgy formulas that describe processes not rediscovered until the Industrial Revolution. Star charts that accurately predict the position of planets 26,000 years in advance. Instructions for what can only be described as genetic engineering techniques. In 1953, a team of researchers at the British Museum attempted to create a complete catalogue of their cuneiform collection. The project was abandoned after 6 months. The official reason given was insufficient funding. The real reason, according to internal memos that surfaced decades later, was that too many tablets contain materials unsuitable for public scholarship. Imagine being a researcher in that basement, reading by lamplight, when you realize that the clay tablet in your hands describes the creation of human beings as a deliberate act by non-human entities, not as mythology, not as religious allegory, but as historical record, complete with technical specifications and breeding timelines. How do you publish that research? How do you explain to the world that everything we thought we knew about human origins might be wrong? You cannot. So, you file it away in a wooden crate marked "Translation Pending" and hope that someone else will deal with it someday. That someday never comes. The tablets describe beings called the Anunnaki, who possessed knowledge of genetics, astronomy, metallurgy, and engineering that surpassed anything humans would develop for thousands of years. They speak of sky vehicles, of genetic laboratories, of hybrid offspring created through deliberate manipulation of human DNA. They provide genealogies of rulers whose lifespans stretch across centuries, detailed enough to cross-reference with other historical sources. Most disturbing of all, these tablets are not unique to Mesopotamia. Similar accounts have been found in Egypt, India, South America, and the Pacific Islands. Always the same basic story. Advanced beings who came from somewhere else, who taught humans civilization, who created hybrid offspring, and who eventually disappeared, leaving behind only monuments too advanced for the civilizations that supposedly built them. Tonight, in museums around the world, security guards walk past storage rooms filled with evidence of this hidden history. Janitors mop floors above basements that contain the most important archaeological discoveries in human history. Tour groups admire carefully selected artifacts while the real treasures remain locked away in climate-controlled vaults, gathering dust and maintaining their secrets. The question that should haunt your dreams is not whether these tablets exist. They do. The question is why someone has decided that you are not allowed to know what they say. As we continue this journey together, we will explore not just what these tablets reveal, but who has been keeping them hidden and why. We will visit the forbidden archives, meet the scholars who risked everything to tell the truth, and piece together a story of human origins that is far stranger and more wonderful than anything you learned in school. But first, let your mind rest on this image. Thousands of clay tablets, each one a voice from humanity's distant past, sitting silent in the darkness, waiting for someone brave enough to let them speak. The Sumerian scholar George Smith was 28 years old when he stumbled across something that would haunt him for the rest of his life. It was 1872, and Smith was working late in the British Museum's ancient manuscript department. The gas lamps flickered as he bent over a fragment of cuneiform tablet, his magnifying glass catching the light. What he found carved into that 4,000-year-old clay would eventually drive him to the edge of madness and transform our understanding of human knowledge itself. The tablet was part of the Enuma Elish, the Babylonian creation epic. But as Smith began translating the wedge-shaped markings, he realized he was not reading mythology. He was reading something that sounded disturbingly like science. Advanced science. The kind of knowledge that should not have existed in 2000 BC. Let me take you through what Smith discovered, piece by piece. Because the implications are staggering, and more than a century later, mainstream archaeology still refuses to address the most disturbing questions these tablets raise. The first impossibility hits you right in the opening lines. The Enuma Elish describes our solar system as containing 12 celestial bodies, not 8 planets like we know today, not even the 9 we thought we had before Pluto got demoted. 12. The tablets name them all. The Sun, the Moon, and 10 planets, including one called Nibiru with an orbital period of 3,600 years. Here is where it gets interesting. When these tablets were written, around 2000 BC, human beings could see exactly 5 planets with the naked eye: Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn. The ancient world had no telescopes, no way to observe Uranus or Neptune, both invisible without optical assistance. Pluto was not discovered until 1930, yet somehow these Babylonian texts describe a complete solar system with mathematical precision that would not be matched by Western astronomy for thousands of years. But here is the truly unsettling part. Modern astronomers are now actively searching for what they call Planet X or Planet 9, a massive celestial body in the outer reaches of our solar system with a highly elliptical orbit. The orbital mechanics described in the Enuma Elish for Nibiru match almost perfectly with current scientific models for this hypothetical 9th planet. How did Bronze Age scribes know about planetary bodies that we are only now beginning to detect? The tablets do not stop at astronomy. They dive deep into what can only be described as genetic engineering. The Sumerian word Lulu appears repeatedly in these texts, and its translation has caused decades of heated debate among scholars. Orthodox academics insist it means primitive man or worker, but linguistic analysis reveals something far more specific. The root components of Lulu translate directly to mixed being or genetically altered creature. The creation passages describe a process the tablets call the binding of genetic essences. They detail how the gods took the clay of the earth and mixed it with their own divine essence to create human beings. Now, you might think this sounds like typical creation mythology until you examine the technical terminology. The Akkadian phrases used translate to concepts like DNA manipulation, controlled breeding programs, and genetic template modification. These are not metaphors. These are technical descriptions using vocabulary that should not have existed in the ancient world. The tablets describe laboratories called houses of fashioning, where this genetic work took place. They mention chambers of purification and vessels of life essence. The detailed instructions include references to 40-day gestation periods and artificial wombs. Remember, this is supposedly Bronze Age mythology, yet it reads like a manual for advanced biotechnology. Dr. Zacharias Sitchin spent decades analyzing these texts before his death in 2010. Sitchin was a legitimate scholar, fluent in ancient Hebrew, Akkadian, and Sumerian. His translations were dismissed by mainstream academia, not because of linguistic errors, but because his conclusions were too disturbing to accept. Sitchin argued that the Enuma Elish was not mythology at all, but historical documentation of genetic experiments conducted by an advanced civilization. The tablets describe the catastrophic collision between 2 planets, Tiamat and Nibiru. According to the text, this cosmic impact shattered Tiamat, creating Earth and its moon from the larger fragments, while the smaller pieces became the asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter. For decades, this was dismissed as pure fantasy. Then, in 1975, astronomers William Hartmann and Donald Davis proposed the giant impact hypothesis. Their theory suggests that Earth's moon was formed when a Mars-sized object called Theia collided with the early Earth approximately 4.5 billion years ago. The debris from this collision eventually coalesced to form our moon. The similarities between this modern scientific theory and the 4,000-year-old Babylonian account are impossible to ignore. The Enuma Elish provides precise mathematical calculations for planetary orbits, axial rotations, and something called the precession of the equinoxes. Precession is the slow wobble of Earth's axis that takes approximately 25,800 years to complete one full cycle. This phenomenon was supposedly not discovered until the Greek astronomer Hipparchus identified it in the 2nd century BC. Yet the Babylonian tablets not only describe precession accurately, they provide calculations correct to within decimal points that match modern computer models. Quick side note here. If you are finding this as fascinating as I am, consider hitting that subscribe button. It really helps the channel grow and allows me to dive deeper into these incredible mysteries. Now, back to our ancient impossibilities. The metallurgical knowledge contained in these tablets is perhaps the most disturbing element of all. The texts describe the production of what they call bright metal through processes that sound remarkably similar to modern techniques for creating monoatomic gold. They detail atmospheric processing procedures designed to repair the breath of the sky using metallic particles suspended in the upper atmosphere. Monoatomic gold is a theoretical substance that exists as single atoms rather than metallic clusters. It was not discovered until the late 20th century, and its potential applications for atmospheric manipulation are still being researched by space agencies today. Yet the Enuma Elish describes both its production and its use in environmental engineering projects 4,000 years ago. The tablets provide step-by-step instructions for extracting and refining this substance from ordinary gold ore. They describe heating processes that require temperatures of over 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit, achieved through techniques involving controlled lightning and focused fire from the sky. The refined product was then dispersed into the atmosphere using what the texts call flying chambers to protect the planet from the deadly rays of the sun god. This matches almost exactly with current research into solar radiation management and atmospheric geoengineering. Scientists today are exploring the possibility of using metallic particles in the upper atmosphere to reflect harmful solar radiation and mitigate climate change. The idea that Bronze Age civilizations not only understood these concepts, but actively implemented them, challenges everything we think we know about human technological development. The mathematical precision extends beyond astronomy into advanced geometry and engineering. The tablets contain calculations for the construction of massive structures using principles that would not be formalized until the development of modern physics. They describe load-bearing calculations, stress analysis, and architectural principles that require understanding of advanced mathematics and materials science. Archaeological evidence supports some of these impossible claims. Across Mesopotamia, researchers have found traces of metallic compounds that should not exist in ancient contexts. Isotopic analysis reveals metals with purity levels that exceed anything achievable through ancient smelting techniques. Some samples show atomic structures that suggest exposure to electromagnetic fields far beyond anything available to Bronze Age civilizations. The translations continue to generate controversy. Orthodox scholars maintain that alternative interpretations of these texts are based on wishful thinking and poor scholarship. They argue that terms being translated as genetic manipulation should be understood as religious metaphors for divine creation. But the linguistic evidence tells a different story. The Akkadian and Sumerian languages were remarkably precise, with distinct words for literal and metaphorical concepts. The genetic terminology appears in technical contexts, not religious or mythological passages. Dr. Samuel Kramer, one of the world's leading Sumerian experts, admitted before his death that certain passages in these texts defied conventional interpretation. He noted that the level of detailed scientific knowledge embedded in the tablets was impossible to explain through normal historical development. Kramer spent 40 years studying Sumerian civilization and concluded that they possessed information that could only have come from an external source with advanced technological capabilities. The tablets also contain detailed star charts and astronomical observations that demonstrate knowledge of galactic movements invisible to the naked eye. They describe the rotation of the Milky Way galaxy and provide calculations for stellar distances that were not confirmed by modern astronomy until the development of powerful telescopes in the 20th century. The precision of these observations suggests access to sophisticated instruments or information sources far beyond anything available to ancient civilizations. Perhaps most unsettling of all, The Enuma Elish describes ongoing contact between human beings and the advanced civilization responsible for genetic modifications. The tablets detail regular visits, continuing education programs, and technological transfers that lasted for thousands of years. They describe flying vehicles, communication devices, and transportation methods that allowed rapid travel between distant locations on Earth and beyond. These are not vague mythological references. The descriptions include technical specifications, operational procedures, and maintenance requirements for advanced technologies. The level of detail suggests direct observation and hands-on experience, rather than imaginative storytelling. As George Smith continued his translations in that flickering gaslight, he began to understand why these tablets had been buried and forgotten. The knowledge they contained was too revolutionary, too threatening to established beliefs about human history and development. Smith's health deteriorated rapidly as he worked. He suffered from insomnia, paranoia, and what his colleagues described as obsessive behavior. He died in 1876 at age 36, just 4 years after beginning his translations. His final notes, discovered after his death, contained increasingly frantic warnings about the implications of what he had uncovered. The Enuma Elish was not the only text containing impossible knowledge. Similar tablets have been found across Mesopotamia, all describing advanced technologies, genetic engineering, and astronomical observations that should not have been possible for their time. Yet mainstream archaeology continues to classify these as mythology, religious texts, or primitive attempts at scientific understanding. The silence surrounding these discoveries raises uncomfortable questions about what else might be hidden in those basement archives beneath the world's great museums. How much ancient knowledge has been deliberately suppressed because it does not fit our accepted timeline of human development? And if Bronze Age civilizations really did possess advanced scientific knowledge, where did it come from? The evidence keeps accumulating, despite official reluctance to address its implications. Every new translation brings fresh impossibilities. Every archaeological discovery adds another piece to a puzzle that challenges our most fundamental assumptions about the past. The Enuma Elish was just the beginning. Dr. Michael Tellinger was crawling through a tunnel barely wider than his shoulders when his headlamp illuminated something that made him freeze in absolute terror. The year was 2003, and he was exploring what locals called the ancient gold mines near Barberton in South Africa's Mpumalanga province. What he found down there, carved into solid rock more than 300 feet underground, were tool marks that defied every timeline of human civilization we have ever constructed. The chisel marks were perfectly geometric, too perfect. They followed mathematical patterns that suggested advanced engineering, not the rough scraping you would expect from primitive humans with stone tools. But here is what made Tellinger's blood run cold. When he had samples carbon dated, the results came back showing these mines were worked continuously for over 100,000 years. Some sections tested even older, far older. We are talking about sophisticated mining operations that began 410,000 years ago, when according to mainstream archaeology, humans had not even figured out how to make fire consistently. Tellinger spent the next 2 decades mapping these underground networks, and what he discovered reads like something out of science fiction. The mine shafts descend in perfect spirals, following gold veins with precision that would challenge modern geological surveys. The ventilation systems still function today, moving air through chambers that stretch for miles beneath the African soil. Whoever built these mines understood fluid dynamics, structural engineering, and metallurgy on a level that humans supposedly did not achieve until the Industrial Revolution. But here is where it gets interesting. While Tellinger was documenting evidence of impossible ancient mining in South Africa, archaeologists in Iraq were translating tablets that seemed to describe the exact same operations. The Atrahasis epic, written in cuneiform around 1800 BC but describing events from thousands of years earlier. According to these tablets, there was a class of beings called the Igigi. Think of them as the working class among the gods. For 40 years, the Atrahasis tells us, the Igigi labored in brutal conditions, extracting gold from deep underground mines in what the tablets call Abzu. Now, Abzu is generally translated as the watery deep or the abyss, but some scholars argue it refers to a specific geographical location, a place rich in gold, a place that sounds remarkably like southern Africa. The tablets describe the Agigi's work in terms that would make any modern miner shudder. They speak of back-breaking labor, of working in darkness so complete it seemed to swallow their very souls. They describe the constant danger of cave-ins, the poisonous gases that would seep from the rock, the way the gold dust would coat their lungs until breathing became agony. For 40 years, according to the epic, they endured this hell, and then they snapped. The rebellion of the Agigi is described in the Atrahasis, with the kind of detail that suggests whoever wrote it down had witnessed similar revolts. The workers surrounded the house of Enlil, the overseer of the operation. At night, they burned their tools in great bonfires that lit up the sky. They chanted demands for better conditions, for rest, for an end to the endless digging. The tablets describe their fury as something that shook the very foundations of heaven. But here is what makes this ancient story genuinely unsettling. The solution the Anunnaki leadership came up with was not better working conditions or shorter hours. According to the tablets, Enlil and the other high-ranking Anunnaki decided to create an entirely new species of workers, beings that would be intelligent enough to operate mining equipment but docile enough never to rebel. They called this new species Lulu Amelu, the mixed ones, the primitive workers. The creation process is described in the Atrahasis and related texts with a level of medical precision that should not exist in ancient literature. Enki, described as the master scientist among the Anunnaki, works alongside Ninmar, who seems to function as a geneticist. The tablets describe them taking essence from the Anunnaki and combining it with the clay of existing earth creatures. But when you read the original Akkadian, the word translated as essence is more accurately rendered as genetic material or seed, and clay refers not to actual clay, but to the flesh and blood of living beings. The process described in these 4,000-year-old tablets reads like a modern genetics textbook. They speak of multiple attempts, of failures where the created beings were born unable to reproduce, of adjustments to the mixture until they achieved the desired balance. Ninmar is described as growing the first successful specimens in artificial wombs, monitoring their development, testing their intelligence and physical capabilities. The tablets even describe what we would recognize today as genetic modification techniques. They speak of inserting the divine spark at specific stages of cellular development. They describe failures where the subjects developed too much intelligence and had to be modified to ensure compliance. The level of detail is staggering. These ancient texts describe procedures that we have only begun to understand in the last 50 years. But perhaps most disturbing of all is how the tablets describe the Lulu Amelu's relationship with their creators. These beings are described as loving their work, as finding fulfillment in the endless labor of gold extraction. They are depicted as grateful for their existence, never questioning their purpose, never dreaming of rebellion. The perfect workers, genetically programmed to be satisfied with a life of servitude. Now, you might be thinking this all sounds like elaborate mythology, the kind of creation story that ancient cultures developed to explain the unexplainable. Modern genetics research has identified exactly the kind of intervention described in these tablets. In 2012, a team led by Dr. Spencer Wells at the National Geographic Genographic Project published findings that human DNA contains what they called genetic bottlenecks, points where our genetic diversity suddenly narrows, as if the entire human species passed through extremely small population groups. But more intriguing, they found evidence of what appears to be artificial genetic modification, sections of human DNA that do not appear in any other earthly species, genetic sequences that seem to have been inserted rather than evolved. The timing of these genetic modifications, according to Wells's research, corresponds almost exactly with the timeline described in the Mesopotamian tablets. Around 200,000 years ago, something happened to human genetics, something that gave us capabilities far beyond what natural evolution should have produced. We developed larger brains, more sophisticated tool use, and most significantly, the ability to engage in complex, coordinated labor. Meanwhile, back in South Africa, Tellinger and his team continued to uncover evidence that supported the tablet accounts. They found mining equipment dating back hundreds of thousands of years, stone tools shaped with mathematical precision, designed for specific metallurgical processes. They discovered evidence of smelting operations that required temperatures achievable only with advanced furnace technology. Most disturbing of all, they found human remains in the deepest sections of these ancient mines, skeletons that showed clear signs of a lifetime spent in hard labor, buried alongside tools and gold fragments. But why gold? The tablets obsess over this particular metal with an intensity that seems almost pathological. Modern science offers some intriguing possibilities. Research into monoatomic gold, conducted by scientists like David Hudson in the 1990s, suggests that gold in certain forms has unique properties. When processed into single-atom particles, gold becomes what is called an exotic matter, with applications in atmospheric engineering. It can interact with electromagnetic fields in ways that could theoretically be used to modify planetary atmospheres. The tablets describe the Anunnaki's need for gold in exactly these terms. They speak of Nibiru, their homeworld, suffering from atmospheric degradation. They describe gold as essential for healing the sky and restoring the breath of heaven. When Hudson's research into monoatomic gold was published, the parallels were impossible to ignore. Here was ancient literature describing the same atmospheric engineering applications that modern science was just beginning to understand. The implications are staggering. If the tablets are accurate historical records rather than mythology, then human civilization did not begin with agriculture in the Fertile Crescent. It began in the gold mines of South Africa, with genetically modified workers created by an advanced non-human intelligence for the specific purpose of large-scale mining operations. We were not the first intelligent species on this planet. We were the second, and we were created to serve the first. The evidence continues to mount with each passing year. New archaeological discoveries in South Africa reveal mining operations of impossible antiquity. Genetic research uncovers more evidence of artificial modification in human DNA, and deep in museum basements, those translated tablets continue to describe a version of human origins that mainstream academia refuses to acknowledge. But perhaps the most unsettling thought is this. If the tablets are correct, if humans were created as a worker species, then what happened to our creators? The Anunnaki supposedly left Earth once their atmospheric repair project was complete. They returned to Nibiru, abandoning their engineered workforce to develop independently. What if they simply stepped back, watching from a distance as their creation struggled to understand its own origins? The next time you see a gold wedding ring or watch someone desperately scrambling to acquire more wealth, remember that according to these ancient texts, our obsession with gold is not cultural, programmed into us by beings who needed that metal for purposes we are only beginning to understand. Dr. Sarah Mitchell's hands were trembling as she stared at the cuneiform tablet under her laboratory magnifying lens at Yale University. It was 2018, and she had been translating Akkadian texts for over 15 years. But what she was reading on this 4,000-year-old clay fragment was making her question everything she thought she knew about ancient civilizations. The tablet was covered in what appeared to be detailed laboratory procedures, not metaphorical creation stories, not religious rituals, actual step-by-step scientific protocols that read like something from a modern genetics textbook. The first that caught her attention described what the ancient scribes called creation chambers. But as Mitchell worked through the translation, she realized these were not mystical vessels for divine magic. The Akkadian terms described enclosed environments with controlled temperature, precise atmospheric conditions, and what could only be sterile laboratory settings. The text mentioned vessels of pure essence mixing and chambers where life forms take shape through careful combination. When she cross-referenced the terminology with modern scientific dictionaries, the parallels were impossible to ignore. These ancient scribes were describing something that sounded exactly like in vitro fertilization laboratories. But here is where things get genuinely unsettling. The tablets did not just describe the equipment, they provided detailed protocols, step-by-step instructions for what they called essence combination procedures. The text explained how to extract what it termed life seeds from both male and female subjects, how to combine them in controlled environments, and how to nurture the resulting formations until they could be implanted into what the tablets called carrying vessels. Mitchell found herself reading what amounted to a Bronze Age instruction manual for artificial insemination and embryo transfer, technologies we did not develop until the 1970s. The terminology alone should have been impossible. Ancient Akkadian contains words that translate almost perfectly to chromosome, genetic material, and hereditary transmission factors. These concepts were completely unknown to human science until the discovery of DNA in the 1950s. Yet here were Mesopotamian scribes writing 4,000 years ago, using technical vocabulary that would not be out of place in a modern molecular biology textbook. They wrote about information carriers that determined physical characteristics, life blueprints that could be modified and manipulated, and inheritance patterns that followed mathematical rules we now recognize as Mendelian genetics. Mitchell's colleague, Dr. James Harrison from the University of Chicago, had been working on a parallel set of tablets that described what he called the 7-generation experiment. These texts outlined a systematic breeding program that spanned exactly 7 generations of what the tablets termed hybrid cultivation. The goal, according to the cuneiform inscriptions, was to create viable offspring from the combination of 2 different species. The tablets referred to one group as those who came from the sky, and the other as the earth dwellers. But what made Harrison's blood run cold was how precisely this matched modern understanding of genetic stabilization. In contemporary genetics, we know that when you attempt to create hybrid organisms from 2 different species, the first generation often suffers from genetic instability. It typically takes multiple generations of careful selective breeding to produce viable, fertile offspring. The ancient tablets described this exact process. They documented the challenges of early generations, including shortened lifespans, reproductive difficulties, and what they called form irregularities. These match perfectly with what modern geneticists call hybrid dysgenesis and outbreeding depression. The 7th generation, according to the tablets, was when they achieved what they termed stable inheritance patterns and successful breeding capability. This is precisely what modern genetic science predicts for multi-generational hybrid stabilization programs. Somehow, Bronze Age scribes understood complex genetic principles that we only figured out in the last century. They knew about dominant and recessive traits, genetic drift, and the mathematical principles governing inheritance patterns. They wrote about these concepts with the precision of trained geneticists. But perhaps the most disturbing aspect of Mitchell's translations involved the documented failures. The tablets did not just celebrate successes, they meticulously recorded experiments that went wrong. They described beings with severe physical deformities, creatures that could not survive outside the creation chambers, and hybrid offspring that were sterile or had drastically reduced lifespans. The level of detail was clinical, almost cold. These read like laboratory reports documenting the challenges and setbacks of a long-term genetic engineering program. One particular tablet, which Mitchell nicknamed the Failure Codex, contained what appeared to be a troubleshooting guide for genetic experiments. It listed specific problems and their proposed solutions. When the life essence combining produces beings with shortened breath cycles, increase the sky dweller contribution by 1/3. When hybrid offspring cannot produce their own kind, repeat the combination process using material from the most successful previous generation. When physical forms deviate from intended patterns, return to pure earth dweller material and begin the sequence again. The precision was staggering. These ancient texts describe genetic modification challenges that match exactly what modern scientists face when attempting to create transgenic organisms or when working with gene therapy. They understood concepts like gene dosage effects, fertility problems in hybrid organisms, and the need for multiple generations to achieve genetic stability, knowledge that should not have existed until the development of modern molecular biology. Mitchell spent months verifying her translations with colleagues around the world. The consensus was unanimous and unsettling. The tablets were authentic, dating to approximately 2000 BC. The language was consistent with other Akkadian texts from the same period, but the scientific content was impossible. These scribes were describing procedures and concepts that required microscopic observation, controlled laboratory conditions, and an understanding of genetics that would not emerge in human science for another 4,000 years. Dr. Harrison discovered additional tablets that described what could only be called quality control measures for their genetic experiments. The texts mentioned specific criteria for selecting successful combinations and detailed methods for identifying inheritance defects in early development stages. They wrote about life pattern analysis and hereditary prediction methods that sound remarkably similar to modern genetic screening techniques. They even describe procedures for what appears to be embryonic selection based on desired characteristics. The tablets also contained mathematical formulas for predicting inheritance patterns. Ancient scribes had calculated probability ratios for various trait combinations that match Mendel's laws of inheritance with stunning accuracy. They understood that certain characteristics would appear in predictable ratios across generations, and they had developed mathematical models to predict these outcomes. This level of statistical analysis applied to genetics would not appear in human science until the early 20th century. What made the situation even more mysterious was the discovery of tablets describing essence preservation methods. These texts outlined techniques for storing what they called life seeds for extended periods, maintaining them in specialized containers with specific environmental conditions. The procedures they described sound remarkably similar to modern cryogenic preservation of genetic material. They wrote about keeping these biological materials viable for many seasonal cycles, using techniques that involved controlled cooling and protective substances that sound like modern cryoprotectants. The implications were staggering. Either these ancient Mesopotamian scribes had access to scientific knowledge and laboratory equipment that would not be invented for millennia, or someone else was providing them with this information, someone who understood genetics, molecular biology, and reproductive technology at a level that matches or exceeds our current capabilities. The tablets suggested a systematic, long-term genetic engineering program carried out with scientific rigor that would impress modern researchers. Mitchell found herself staring at these translations late into the night, wondering who could have possessed such advanced knowledge in the Bronze Age. The tablets spoke of those who came from above, sharing this wisdom with selected humans, teaching them the secrets of life, combination, and essence manipulation. The scientific accuracy of the procedures described in these 4,000-year-old texts suggested that someone, somewhere in ancient Mesopotamia, was conducting genetic experiments with tools and knowledge that should not have existed until our modern era. The phone call came at 2 a.m. Dr. James Patterson, lead archaeologist for the Ohio Historical Society, fumbled for his cell phone in the darkness of his Columbus apartment. The voice on the other end was shaking. "Doctor, you need to get down here right now." Patterson had been excavating Native American burial mounds in Ohio for 23 years. He thought he had seen everything, but when he arrived at the dig site an hour later, his flashlight beam fell across something that made him question every textbook he had ever read about ancient America. Laid out in a carefully arranged burial chamber was a human skeleton that measured 11 feet, 4 inches from skull to heel. The bone structure was massive, but perfectly proportioned. This was not a case of gigantism or some modern medical condition. This was something else entirely. What made Patterson's discovery even more disturbing was the pottery found alongside the giant remains. The ceramic vessels were decorated with symbols that looked remarkably similar to cuneiform writing. In Ohio, dating back over 2,000 years, Patterson took photographs, made detailed measurements, and documented everything according to proper archaeological protocol. Then, within 72 hours, representatives from the Smithsonian Institution arrived at the site. They confiscated every bone, every artifact, every photograph. Patterson was informed that his findings had been classified for national security reasons. The official report listed the discovery as Native American remains of typical size and cultural significance. But Patterson had made copies of everything, and what he discovered when he compared his documentation to ancient Mesopotamian texts was something that kept him awake for months afterward. The biblical book of Genesis mentions them in chapter 6, verse 4. There were giants in the earth in those days, and also after that, when the sons of God came in unto the daughters of men, and they bare children to them. Men of renown. The Hebrew word used in the original text is Nephilim. It means the fallen ones. For centuries, scholars dismissed these biblical passages as mythology, metaphorical language describing spiritual concepts or moral lessons. But when you start cross-referencing Genesis with Akkadian cuneiform tablets, particularly those describing the Anunnaki hybrid breeding programs, the parallels become impossible to ignore. Both sources describe the same basic scenario: divine beings mating with human women to create a race of hybrid offspring possessing extraordinary abilities. Both mention these hybrids teaching advanced knowledge to primitive human populations. Both describe these giant beings as rulers and warriors who shaped the course of early civilization. The Mesopotamian tablets are more explicit in their scientific descriptions. They use terms that translate to mixing of seeds, creation chambers, and divine essence combined with earth clay. But the biblical account, when examined in its original Hebrew, contains surprisingly specific details about the physical characteristics and abilities of the Nephilim. They are described as Gibborim, which means mighty ones or heroes. The text indicates they possessed superhuman strength, extended lifespans, and what modern researchers might interpret as psychic or telepathic abilities. Dr. Patricia Williams spent 15 years studying Native American oral traditions throughout North America before she encountered a pattern that made her rethink everything she knew about prehistoric America. Tribe after tribe, from the Lakota to the Cherokee to the Hopi, maintained detailed stories about the Tall Ones, or the ancient giants, who once ruled the land before being destroyed in a great catastrophe. These were not vague myths or creation stories. They were specific historical accounts passed down through generations of tribal historians. The Paiute tribe of Nevada tells of the Siteka, red-haired giants who lived in caves around Lovelock Lake. According to tribal history, these giants were cannibalistic and hostile to normal-sized humans. The Paiutes eventually waged war against the Siteka, driving them into the caves and sealing them inside with fire and smoke. When archaeologists excavated Lovelock Cave in 1912, they found mummified remains of individuals measuring between 8 and 10 feet tall. The mummies had red hair and were wearing textiles woven with techniques unknown to the local Native American populations. The Smithsonian confiscated these remains as well. They have never been publicly displayed or studied. But here is where the story takes a turn that connects directly to our Mesopotamian evidence. Modern DNA analysis has revealed something extraordinary about human genetic history. Around 200,000 years ago, human genetic diversity shows a dramatic bottleneck. Our species went through what geneticists call a founder effect, where the genetic variety present in modern humans suggests we all descended from a very small population. But mixed within our genome are sequences that do not match the expected pattern of gradual evolutionary development. Dr. Spencer Wells, a geneticist at the National Geographic Society, has identified what he calls genetic markers of unknown origin. Scattered throughout human DNA, these sequences appear to have been introduced suddenly, not through gradual mutation or natural selection. They show up consistently in populations around the world, but their source organism cannot be identified through comparison with any known primate or mammalian genome. Wells has publicly stated that these genetic anomalies suggest the possibility of hybridization with a non-terrestrial species sometime in humanity's prehistoric past. When you combine this genetic evidence with the archaeological record, a disturbing picture begins to emerge. Giant skeletal remains have been discovered on every continent. In Ecuador, archaeologists have found human remains measuring up to 12 feet tall. In the Caucasus Mountains, Soviet-era excavations uncovered burial sites containing individuals over 9 feet in height. Celtic burial mounds in Ireland have yielded skeletons of similar proportions. In each case, the remains showed signs of advanced metallurgy, sophisticated burial practices, and artifacts suggesting knowledge of astronomy and mathematics. The Mesopotamian tablets describe the Anunnaki as establishing watcher stations around the world to monitor their hybrid experiments. These watchers were responsible for teaching selected human populations the basics of agriculture, metalworking, and civilization. If this sounds familiar, it should. The biblical Book of Enoch, which was considered canonical scripture until the 4th century AD, describes the watchers in nearly identical terms. According to Enoch, these fallen angels taught humanity the secrets of heaven, including metallurgy, cosmetics, astrology, and the arts of war. The abilities attributed to the Nephilim in both biblical and Mesopotamian sources read like a checklist of traits reported in modern alien abduction accounts. Enhanced physical strength and endurance, telepathic communication, extended lifespans measuring in centuries rather than decades, the ability to manipulate matter at a molecular level, heightened psychic sensitivity, and precognitive abilities. These are not the supernatural powers described in fairy tales. They read like the result of genetic modifications designed to create optimal hybrid beings. What makes this even more unsettling is the systematic suppression of evidence that continues to this day. The Smithsonian Institution has been documented destroying or concealing giant skeletal remains for over a century. In 1912, they issued a directive stating that any human remains measuring over 7 feet in height were to be classified and removed from public access. Museum curators who questioned this policy were reassigned or terminated. Independent researchers who attempted to study confiscated materials were denied access under various bureaucratic pretexts. This cover-up extends beyond just skeletal remains. Ancient texts that describe human-divine hybridization programs have been systematically mistranslated or dismissed as mythology by mainstream academics. Archaeological sites showing evidence of advanced prehistoric technology are either restricted from public access or explained away through increasingly creative conventional theories. The pattern suggests a coordinated effort to prevent the general public from understanding the true nature of human origins. But the truth has a way of surfacing, despite attempts at suppression. Modern genetic research continues to uncover anomalies in human DNA that cannot be explained through conventional evolutionary theory. Archaeological discoveries worldwide keep producing evidence of advanced prehistoric civilizations that supposedly never existed. And ancient texts, when properly translated without the filter of traditional, religious, or academic bias, tell a remarkably consistent story about humanity's hybrid origins. The Nephilim were not mythological beings. They were the documented result of a genetic engineering program conducted by an advanced non-human intelligence in humanity's prehistoric past. The evidence is scattered across every field of study, from archaeology to genetics to comparative mythology. The only reason we do not recognize this truth is because powerful institutions have spent over a century ensuring that we never piece the fragments together into a coherent picture. Dr. Klaus Schmidt knew he was looking at something that would rewrite history, but he had no idea the academic world would fight him every step of the way. It was 1994, and he was standing on a hilltop in southeastern Turkey, brushing centuries of dirt away from carved limestone pillars that towered over his head. The local Kurdish shepherds had been telling stories about this place for generations. They called it Göbekli Tepe, which means Potbelly Hill in their language. But what Schmidt was uncovering beneath the Turkish soil was not just another archaeological site. It was proof that everything we thought we knew about the dawn of civilization was completely wrong. The pillars emerging from the earth were massive. Some weighed over 16 tons. They were carved with intricate reliefs of animals, geometric patterns, and symbols that seemed to follow sophisticated astronomical alignments. But here is what made Schmidt's hands shake as he held his carbon dating results. These monuments were 12,000 years old. They predated the Sumerian civilization by 6,000 years. They predated Stonehenge by 7,000 years. According to every textbook Schmidt had ever read, the people who built Göbekli Tepe should have been nomadic hunter-gatherers living in animal skins, struggling to survive in a harsh post-Ice Age world. They should not have possessed the mathematical knowledge, engineering skills, or organizational capacity to construct something this sophisticated. Yet there it was, emerging from the hillside like a message from a forgotten age. The site contained at least 20 stone circles, each one precisely arranged according to complex geometric principles. The carved pillars showed detailed knowledge of anatomy, both human and animal. Some of the reliefs depicted star maps, with accuracy that would not be seen again until the development of modern astronomy. The limestone had been quarried, shaped, and transported using techniques that supposedly would not be invented for thousands of years. Every piece of evidence suggested that 12,000 years ago, there was a civilization in Turkey with capabilities that rivaled or exceeded anything the Sumerians would later achieve. But when Schmidt tried to publish his findings, he ran into something unexpected. Resistance. Not just academic skepticism, which he had expected, but active suppression. Journal editors refused to print his papers. Conference organizers declined his speaking proposals. Funding agencies suddenly found reasons to reject his grant applications. The message was clear. Göbekli Tepe did not fit the established timeline, so it would be ignored until it could be explained away. This pattern of suppression extends far beyond Turkey. Consider Pumapunku in Bolivia, where stone blocks weighing over 100 tons have been cut with precision that would require diamond-tipped tools. The joints between these massive stones are so tight you cannot slip a piece of paper between them. The surfaces are polished to a mirror finish. Every angle is mathematically perfect, yet orthodox archaeology insists these structures are only 1,500 years old. built by indigenous peoples with copper tools and manual labor. When independent researchers use advanced dating techniques and find evidence of much greater age, their results are dismissed or their funding disappears. Quick side note here. If you are finding this exploration into suppressed history as fascinating as I am, consider becoming a channel member. Your support helps keep this kind of deep dive content coming. Anyway, back to these forbidden discoveries. The same pattern emerges at Nan Madol in Micronesia, where basalt columns weighing up to 50 tons were somehow transported across open ocean and assembled into complex structures on artificial islands. The engineering required to accomplish this feat surpasses what we credit to ancient Pacific cultures, but rather than acknowledge the implications, archaeologists simply insist the dates must be wrong, the techniques must have been simpler than they appear, or the builders must have had help from more advanced civilizations from elsewhere. Then there is the Denisovan mystery, which might be the most significant discovery of all. In caves scattered across Asia, researchers have been finding fragments of DNA from a previously unknown human subspecies. The Denisovans, as they have been named, were not quite Neanderthal and not quite modern human, something that possessed genetic traits suggesting higher intelligence, larger brain capacity, and adaptation to environments that would challenge normal humans. Most intriguingly, modern populations in the Pacific region carry significant percentages of Denisovan DNA, far more than would be expected from casual interbreeding. What if the Denisovans were not primitive cousins of humanity, but representatives of an advanced branch that developed separately? What if their genes persist in Pacific populations because those populations are descendants of a sophisticated maritime civilization that predates everything we recognize as the beginning of recorded history? The genetic evidence suggests possibilities that mainstream academia refuses to seriously consider. The suppression becomes even more obvious when you examine what archaeologists call out-of-place artifacts, or UPARTs. These are manufactured objects, found in geological contexts, that should be impossible according to conventional dating. In coal mines across America, workers have discovered machined metal objects embedded in coal seams that are supposedly 300 million years old. These are not crude tools or natural formations. They are precisely manufactured items that show evidence of advanced metallurgy and engineering. In Iraq, archaeologists have found what appear to be electrical batteries in ancient contexts. These devices consist of copper cylinders, iron rods, and acidic solutions that, when assembled, produce measurable electrical current. They are nearly 2,000 years old. The official explanation is that they were used for electroplating jewelry, but this raises obvious questions about how ancient peoples developed electrochemical knowledge without understanding the underlying scientific principles. Perhaps most disturbing are the precision-cut stone blocks found at sites around the world. From Egypt to Peru to Lebanon, ancient builders somehow achieved cutting tolerances that modern stonemasons struggle to match, even with diamond-tipped tools and computer-guided equipment. The H-blocks at Pumapunku, for example, are cut with angles accurate to within 0.02 of a degree. Yet we are supposed to believe this was accomplished with copper chisels and human labor. When archaeologists propose that these achievements might indicate advanced technology or knowledge systems that predate known civilizations, their careers often face systematic destruction. Funding gets cut. Publications refuse their papers. Universities deny tenure. Colleagues distance themselves. The message is clear. Certain questions should not be asked. Certain possibilities should not be explored. Dr. Robert Schoch learned this lesson when he proposed that water erosion patterns on the Sphinx indicated it was much older than traditionally believed. John Anthony West faced similar resistance when he suggested that Egyptian monuments showed evidence of advanced knowledge that supposedly did not exist when they were built. These were not fringe theorists or amateur enthusiasts. They were respected academics with solid credentials and rigorous methodologies, but their conclusions threatened established timelines, so their work was marginalized. The pattern suggests something deeper than mere academic conservatism. It implies active effort to maintain a particular narrative about human development, even when evidence contradicts that narrative. The Sumerian civilization serves as a convenient starting point for recorded history because it fits certain assumptions about how knowledge develops and spreads. But what if those assumptions are wrong? What if civilization did not begin in Mesopotamia 6,000 years ago, but much earlier, in places we have not yet acknowledged? The evidence scattered across the globe tells a different story. From Turkey to Bolivia to Micronesia to Egypt, archaeological sites reveal capabilities that should not have existed according to conventional timelines. Advanced astronomy, precision engineering, sophisticated mathematics, complex organizational systems, all of it appearing suddenly in the archaeological record without the gradual development that evolutionary models would predict. Consider the implications if this evidence is accurate. If human civilization is far older and more sophisticated than we have been taught, then our entire understanding of species development, technological progress, and cultural evolution needs fundamental revision. Perhaps the Sumerians were not the first to develop writing, mathematics, and urban planning. Perhaps they inherited these achievements from predecessors whose existence has been systematically obscured. The question then becomes not whether advanced pre-Sumerian civilizations existed, but why evidence of their existence continues to be suppressed. What interests are served by maintaining the current historical narrative? Who benefits from ensuring that certain discoveries remain buried in museum basements or dismissed as anomalies? The answers to these questions might be even more significant than the archaeological mysteries themselves. Professor Margaret Wiley was sitting in her cramped office at the University of Chicago when she realized she had been staring at the same cuneiform tablet for 3 hours straight. The late afternoon sun was slanting through her dusty window, casting long shadows across her desk, covered in reference books and translation notes. It was 2019, and she had been studying ancient Mesopotamian texts for over 2 decades. But this particular tablet, part of a collection recently acquired from a private dealer in Baghdad, was making her question everything she thought she understood about the development of human civilization. The tablet was dated to approximately 3500 BC, placing it right at the dawn of Sumerian civilization. But what was written on it should not have been possible for that time period. The cuneiform symbols described mathematical concepts that European scholars would not discover for another 4,000 years. Advanced astronomical calculations, sophisticated medical procedures, legal frameworks more complex than anything found in medieval Europe. It was as if someone had taken a modern textbook and somehow carved it into clay, using 4,000-year-old writing tools. Wiley picked up her phone and called her colleague Dr. Robert Chen at Harvard. "Robert, I need you to look at something. Can you get on a video call right now?" 20 minutes later, Chen's face filled her laptop screen, his expression shifting from casual curiosity to stunned disbelief as Wiley held up high-resolution photographs of the tablet translations. "Margaret, this cannot be right. These mathematical formulas, they are describing planetary orbital mechanics. The Sumerians should not have known that planets even existed, let alone calculated their precise movements around the sun." Chen was leaning so close to his camera that his face filled the entire screen. "And look at this here. This is describing what appears to be surgical procedures for cataract removal. The level of anatomical knowledge required for this kind of operation was not achieved in the West until the 18th century. This was the puzzle that had been haunting archaeologists and historians for over a century. The Sumerian civilization did not gradually develop like every other culture we know of. It did not slowly evolve from simple farming communities into complex urban centers over thousands of years. Instead, it appeared seemingly overnight around 3500 BC, fully formed and already possessing knowledge that should have taken millennia to accumulate. Consider what we are looking at here. In the space of just a few hundred years, the Sumerians developed the world's first writing system. Not simple pictographs or basic symbols, but a sophisticated method of recording complex ideas, legal contracts, mathematical calculations, and detailed historical records. They created the first schools, the first libraries, the first hospitals. They established the first known legal code, with detailed laws covering property rights, criminal justice, and commercial transactions that would not look out of place in a modern courthouse. But perhaps most remarkably, they developed astronomical knowledge that was staggeringly accurate. Sumerian tablets described the movements of planets with mathematical precision. They knew that the Earth was round and calculated its circumference to within just a few percentage points of the actual measurement. They described the solar system as having 12 major celestial bodies, including what they called the 12th planet beyond Pluto, which modern astronomers are still searching for today. Dr. Zechariah Sitchin spent decades translating these astronomical tablets, and what he found was both fascinating and deeply unsettling. The Sumerians possessed detailed knowledge of planetary orbits, including planets that cannot be seen with the naked eye. They described Uranus as a greenish planet with rings, Neptune as a watery blue world, and Pluto as a small, distant body at the edge of our solar system. Keep in mind that Uranus was not discovered by modern astronomy until 1781, Neptune in 1846, and Pluto in 1930. How could ancient people living in 4000 BC have known about planets that would not be officially discovered for another 5,000 years? The medical knowledge preserved in Sumerian texts is equally impossible to explain through conventional historical models. Clay tablets describe surgical procedures for removing cataracts, setting broken bones, and performing what appears to be primitive but effective brain surgery. They document pharmaceutical preparations using plants and minerals that modern science has confirmed possess the exact healing properties the ancient texts claim. Some of these medicinal recipes are so sophisticated that pharmaceutical companies today are studying them for potential drug development. But here is where the story takes a turn that makes many historians deeply uncomfortable. The Sumerians themselves never claimed to have developed this knowledge through gradual learning or cultural evolution. Instead, their own texts consistently state that this information was given to them directly by beings they called the Anunnaki. These were not abstract gods or mythological figures in Sumerian accounts. They were described as physical beings who came from the sky, established cities, and taught human beings the arts of civilization. The Sumerian king lists, carved into stone and preserved in multiple copies, describe these Anunnaki as ruling for thousands of years before human kings took over. The texts are quite specific about this transition. They state that the Anunnaki taught humans writing, mathematics, astronomy, medicine, law, agriculture, and metallurgy, then gradually withdrew from direct rule while leaving human administrators in charge. This pattern of divine teachers appearing to establish civilization shows up in cultures all around the world, often with remarkably similar details. The Babylonian historian Berossus, writing in the 3rd century BC, preserved much older traditions describing beings called the Oannes, or Apkallu. According to these accounts, fish-like creatures emerged from the Persian Gulf during the day to teach human beings the arts of civilization, then returned to the water each night. Berossus describes them as having human intelligence and speech, but an appearance that was part human and part aquatic creature. What makes these accounts particularly intriguing is how they align with archaeological evidence of rapid knowledge transfer. The Indus Valley civilization, developing around the same time as Sumer, shows similar patterns of sudden advancement. Complex urban planning, sophisticated water management systems, standardized weights and measures, and a writing system that appears fully developed from its earliest examples. There is no gradual evolution visible in the archaeological record. The knowledge seems to appear all at once, as if it was transmitted from an outside source. The same pattern appears in ancient Egypt. The earliest Egyptian hieroglyphic texts are not primitive or experimental. They demonstrate a fully mature writing system with complex grammatical structures and abstract concepts. Egyptian astronomical knowledge was similarly advanced from the very beginning. The Great Pyramid of Giza, built around 2500 BC, incorporates mathematical constants like pi and the golden ratio that were supposedly unknown until much later in human history. Ancient Chinese civilization shows this same mysterious pattern. The earliest Chinese texts describe the arrival of dragon kings and celestial emperors who taught humanity the arts of civilization. These beings are said to have established the foundations of Chinese culture, then departed, leaving human rulers to carry on their teachings. The level of astronomical and mathematical knowledge preserved in early Chinese texts far exceeds what should have been possible for the time period. What we are looking at across multiple ancient cultures is not the slow, gradual development of human knowledge over thousands of years. Instead, we see sudden explosions of sophisticated information appearing simultaneously in different parts of the world. Advanced mathematics, precise astronomy, complex medical knowledge, sophisticated legal systems, all appearing within a relatively short time frame around 4,000 to 5,000 years ago. The traditional explanation for this phenomenon involves cultural diffusion through trade networks. The idea is that one group developed this knowledge through normal means, then spread it to other cultures through commerce and communication. But this explanation breaks down when we examine the timeline and geographical distances involved. The simultaneous appearance of similar knowledge in Mesopotamia, the Indus Valley, Egypt, and China occurs across thousands of miles, and before significant trade networks could have facilitated such widespread information transfer. Moreover, the knowledge itself often appears to exceed what any individual human culture could have developed independently. The astronomical observations required to calculate planetary orbits accurately would have taken centuries of careful measurement and mathematical analysis. The medical procedures described in ancient texts required anatomical knowledge that comes from extensive dissection and experimentation. The mathematical concepts appear without the prerequisite simpler mathematics that should have preceded them. All of this points toward a conclusion that mainstream academia has been reluctant to consider. The explosion of human knowledge around 4000 BC may not have been a human achievement at all. Instead, it may represent the systematic transfer of advanced information from a non-human source to various human populations around the world. A coordinated effort to establish the foundations of civilization by beings whose own level of development far exceeded anything humans had achieved on their own. The Sumerian tablets themselves support this interpretation. They describe the Anunnaki not as mythological figures, but as physical beings with advanced technology and scientific knowledge. The texts state clearly that human civilization was not a natural development, but rather the result of direct intervention and teaching by these beings. And if the Sumerians were correct in their own accounts of their origins, then everything we think we know about the independent development of human civilization needs to be completely reconsidered. The morning mist was still clinging to the mountains of southeastern Turkey when Dr. Elena Rodriguez first laid eyes on the artifact that would change everything she thought she knew about ancient technology. It was 2022, and she was part of an international team continuing the excavation work at Göbekli Tepe that Klaus Schmidt had started decades earlier. But this discovery was different from the massive stone pillars that had already rewritten our understanding of prehistoric civilization. Hidden in a sealed chamber beneath Pillar 43 was a collection of clay tablets covered in cuneiform script that read like instruction manuals for machines that should not have existed 11,000 years ago. The first tablet Rodriguez translated contained what could only be described as technical specifications for some kind of aircraft. The Sumerian text used terms that had no equivalent in their known vocabulary for earthbound transportation. These were not descriptions of boats or chariots, or any vehicle designed to travel along the ground. The scribes wrote about sky chambers that move without touching earth, and vessels that drink fire and breathe thunder. But it was the detailed measurements and operational procedures that made Rodriguez's hands shake as she worked through the translation. The tablets described craft with specific dimensional ratios that matched the aerodynamic principles discovered by modern aerospace engineers. The ancient texts spoke of divine metal that does not rust, formed into shapes that cut through air like a knife through water. They documented precise angles for what they called sky wings and detailed calculations for weight distribution that would not be out of place in a contemporary aircraft design manual. These were not vague mythological references to gods flying through the heavens. These were technical specifications written with the precision of engineers who understood exactly how their machines worked. What made these discoveries even more remarkable was the systematic way the ancient scribes had documented what they called divine fire technology. Modern rocket engineers reading these translations recognized descriptions of combustion chambers, fuel injection systems, and exhaust nozzles. The tablets described how brilliant radiance was contained within metal chambers, and how this controlled explosion could propel the sky vessels at tremendous speeds. They even documented what appeared to be staging systems, where multiple fire chambers could be ignited in sequence to achieve greater altitude and velocity. The communication technology described in these ancient texts was equally astonishing. The Sumerians wrote about something they called the divine net, a system that allowed the Anunnaki to communicate instantly across vast distances. The tablets described speaking tablets that could carry voices and images to any location where another such device existed. The operational procedures read like modern satellite communication protocols, complete with instructions for establishing signal links, managing frequency interference, and maintaining network connections across what the texts called the great distances between settlements. These communication devices were apparently integrated with navigation systems that could pinpoint exact locations anywhere on Earth. The tablets described how the Anunnaki could use their divine net to coordinate mining operations across different continents, sharing real-time information about extraction rates, equipment status, and resource discoveries. The level of technological integration described in these 4,000-year-old texts surpassed many modern industrial operations in terms of coordination and efficiency. Perhaps most intriguing were the detailed descriptions of mining equipment that seemed designed for large-scale geological engineering. The tablets documented machines they called earthbreakers that could tunnel through solid rock with what appeared to be focused energy beams. These devices could supposedly cut through granite and other hard stone with the precision of modern laser cutting tools, creating perfectly straight tunnels and extraction chambers. The ancient texts described mountain-moving devices capable of relocating enormous quantities of earth and rock, suggesting machinery that operated on scales comparable to modern strip mining equipment. The energy requirements for these operations were met by what the tablets called divine fire chambers, which generated power through processes that sound remarkably similar to controlled nuclear reactions. The Sumerian scribes wrote about materials that burned without being consumed and energy that multiplied itself when properly contained. They documented safety procedures for handling these power sources, including warnings about fire that could consume a city if improperly managed. These were not primitive people making up stories about magical technologies. These were technical manuals written by individuals who understood the dangerous power they were working with. The medical technology described in the tablets was equally sophisticated. The Anunnaki apparently operated healing chambers that could repair injuries and extend lifespans far beyond normal human limits. The text described procedures that sound like genetic therapy, organ regeneration, and cellular repair techniques. They documented surgical procedures, performed with tools that could cut and seal tissue without causing bleeding, suggesting something like modern laser surgery. The level of anatomical knowledge displayed in these procedures matched or exceeded what medical schools teach today about human physiology and surgical techniques. What truly set these discoveries apart from other ancient astronaut theories was the systematic nature of the documentation. These were not isolated references to flying gods or magical powers. The tablets contained comprehensive technical libraries covering everything from basic maintenance procedures to complex system upgrades. They described training programs for operators, quality control processes for manufactured components, and troubleshooting guides for when equipment malfunctioned. This was the documentation of a technological civilization that had developed sophisticated industrial processes and was systematically recording their knowledge for future generations. The implications of these discoveries extend far beyond simple questions about ancient astronauts or lost civilizations. If these translations are accurate, they suggest that advanced technology has existed on Earth for much longer than we have ever imagined, and that our current technological development may be more of a rediscovery process than genuine innovation. The tablets describe technologies that we are only beginning to develop today, documented by scribes who lived when most of humanity was still living in Stone Age conditions. This knowledge gap suggests that human technological development has not been the smooth progression we see in our history books, but rather a series of dramatic leaps followed by periods of loss and rediscovery. As the sun set over the Turkish mountains on that day in 2022, Rodriguez realized she was looking at evidence that would force humanity to reconsider our entire understanding of technological progress and our place in the cosmic timeline. Dr. Rebecca Chen had been staring at the same DNA sequence on her computer screen for 47 minutes when she finally accepted what the data was telling her. It was 3:15 in the morning at the Stanford Genetics Laboratory, and she was the only person left in the building. The fluorescent lights hummed quietly overhead as she scrolled through chromosome analysis after chromosome analysis, each one confirming what should have been impossible. The human genetic code was not behaving the way evolution said it should. Chen had spent the last 8 years studying human chromosomal fusion, particularly the mysterious joining of what should be 2 separate chromosomes into what we now call chromosome 2. In every other primate species, these chromosomes remain separate. Chimpanzees have 24 pairs of chromosomes. Humans have 23. The standard explanation taught in every genetics textbook was that sometime in our evolutionary past, two chromosomes accidentally fused together, and this fusion somehow provided an evolutionary advantage that helped early humans survive and reproduce. But the more Chen studied the actual mechanics of this fusion, the more troubled she became. Chromosomal fusions are typically associated with genetic disorders and reduced fertility, not evolutionary advantages. When they occur naturally in modern humans, they usually result in developmental problems or pregnancy complications. Yet somehow, in our ancient ancestors, this fusion had supposedly occurred cleanly, completely, and with perfect functionality across an entire population. The statistical probability of such an event happening naturally and then spreading through the entire human species was so small that Chen's computer kept returning error messages when she tried to calculate it. What made the situation even more puzzling were the other genetic anomalies that seemed to cluster around the same time period in human development. Around 200,000 years ago, the human genetic record showed evidence of what population geneticists call a severe bottleneck. This meant that the entire human population had been reduced to somewhere between 1,000 and 10,000 breeding individuals. Traditional evolutionary theory suggested this was the result of some catastrophic environmental event, like a volcanic eruption or climate change, that nearly wiped out early humans. But when Chen mapped the genetic diversity that emerged from this bottleneck, the patterns did not match what you would expect from random survivors of a natural disaster. Instead, the genetic markers suggested that the founding population had been carefully selected for specific traits. Enhanced cognitive abilities, improved pattern recognition, and unusually robust immune systems all showed signs of having been deliberately concentrated in the survivors of this mysterious population reduction. Chen's research had led her to collaborate with Dr. Michael Torres, a hematologist at Johns Hopkins, who had been studying the distribution patterns of R-negative blood types across different populations. Torres had discovered something that kept him awake at night thinking about the implications. Ra-negative blood, which occurs in only about 15% of the global population, showed distribution patterns that made no evolutionary sense whatsoever. In most animal populations, genetic traits distribute according to environmental pressures and geographic isolation. Cold climate adaptations appear in northern populations. Malaria resistance develops in regions where the disease is common. But Rh-negative blood showed up in completely random geographic clusters, with no apparent connection to environmental factors. High concentrations appeared in certain populations in the Basque region of Spain, parts of Ireland and Scotland, some isolated communities in the Appalachian Mountains, and scattered tribal groups in various parts of the world. Even more mysteriously, these Rh-negative populations consistently showed higher rates of certain unusual abilities. Enhanced intuition, improved pattern recognition, and what psychologists carefully termed non-standard perceptual capabilities appeared significantly more often in AH-negative individuals than in the general population. Torres had initially dismissed these correlations as coincidental, but as his database grew to include genetic information from over 50,000 individuals, the patterns became impossible to ignore. The RR-negative mystery deepened when Torres began tracing family lineages through historical records. Many of the oldest European royal bloodlines showed unusually high concentrations of Rh-negative blood, often maintaining these percentages through centuries of carefully arranged marriages. The same patterns appeared in ancient Egyptian pharaonic dynasties, Chinese imperial families, and ruling classes throughout various civilizations. These elite bloodlines seemed to be preserving something specific in their genetic heritage, something they considered valuable enough to maintain through generations of selective breeding. Dr. Lisa Park, a geneticist working with centenarian populations at the National Institute on Aging, had stumbled across another piece of this genetic puzzle while studying exceptional longevity. She had been analyzing DNA samples from individuals who had lived past 100 years old when she noticed that many of them carried genetic markers that should not have provided any survival advantage according to current evolutionary theory. Instead of the typical genetic optimizations you would expect in a long-lived population, these individuals showed signs of what Park could only describe as genetic enhancement. Their cellular repair mechanisms functioned at levels that exceeded normal human parameters. Their immune systems maintained functionality well into advanced age, when most people experienced significant decline. Most remarkably, Their neurons showed resistance to the typical age-related damage that causes cognitive decline. Park's research suggested that these genetic advantages had been present since birth, not acquired through lifestyle choices or environmental factors. When Park cross-referenced her longevity data with Chen's chromosomal research and Torres's blood type studies, an unexpected pattern emerged. The genetic markers associated with exceptional longevity, enhanced abilities, and AR-negative blood frequently appeared together in the same individuals. These combinations occurred far more often than statistical probability would predict, suggesting that these traits had been linked together intentionally rather than by random genetic drift. The implications of this research were troubling enough that all three scientists had begun meeting privately to discuss their findings. They were looking at genetic evidence that suggested human development had not followed the gradual, random process described by traditional evolutionary theory. Instead, the human genome appeared to bear the signatures of deliberate modification, careful selection, and ongoing maintenance across thousands of generations. Perhaps most disturbing of all were the reports that continued to surface from genetic counselors and fertility specialists around the world. Unexplained pregnancy complications, unusual fetal development patterns, and genetic anomalies that appeared and then mysteriously resolved themselves were occurring at rates that exceeded normal statistical variation. Some of these cases involved women who reported strange dreams or missing time episodes during their pregnancies. Others involved families with histories of unusual abilities or experiences that they rarely discussed openly. The evidence was pointing toward a conclusion that challenged everything we thought we understood about human origins and development. We were not simply the product of random evolutionary processes. We were the result of an ongoing genetic program that had been operating for hundreds of thousands of years, and that program appeared to still be active in the modern world. The ancient cuneiform tablet felt cool beneath Dr. Sarah Mitchell's fingertips as she worked by the soft glow of her desk lamp in the basement archives of the British Museum. It was past midnight on a quiet Tuesday in October, and London slept peacefully above her while she puzzled over calculations that seemed to predict something extraordinary. The tablet, part of a collection acquired from a Syrian antiquities dealer in 1998, contained astronomical measurements that had been dismissed by her colleagues as religious mythology. But as Mitchell traced each wedge-shaped symbol with her magnifying glass, she began to understand that she was looking at something far more precise than ancient prayers to the gods. The calculations described an orbital period of 3,600 years, not 3,600 days, not 3,600 months, but 3,600 complete Earth years for a celestial body the Sumerians called Nibiru. The mathematical precision was breathtaking. The tablet provided detailed descriptions of elliptical orbital mechanics, gravitational interactions with the outer planets, and predicted effects on the inner solar system that would not be fully understood by modern astronomers until the 21st century. Yet here it was, carved in stone by people who supposedly believed the Earth was flat and supported by 4 elephants standing on a turtle. What made Mitchell's late-night discovery even more intriguing was how the orbital calculations seemed to correspond with patterns she had been noticing in her research on ancient climate data. Every 3,600 years, give or take a century or two, something dramatic happened to human civilization. The Ice Ages ended abruptly around 11,600 years ago. The great flood stories from cultures worldwide clustered around 8,000 BC. The Bronze Age collapse occurred around 1200 BC. Each event separated by roughly that same mysterious 3,600-year interval. The Sumerian texts describe these periods as times when the Anunnaki would return to Earth, bringing with them both great knowledge and great upheaval. The tablets spoke of how the approaching celestial body would disturb the orbits of the outer planets first, sending asteroids tumbling toward the inner solar system. They described how the gravitational effects would cause increased volcanic activity, unusual weather patterns, and what they called the shaking of the foundations of heaven and earth. As Mitchell cross-referenced these ancient descriptions with modern astronomical data, she felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature in the basement archives. NASA had been tracking unusual perturbations in the orbits of Neptune and Uranus since the early 2000s. The Kuiper Belt, that distant region of icy debris beyond Pluto, had been showing increased activity, with more objects being knocked out of their stable orbits than statistical models could explain. Solar activity had been intensifying in ways that correlated with no known natural cycle. The ancient texts suggested that the Anunnaki had learned to predict and prepare for these orbital return periods. The tablets described how they would complete their genetic experiments, preserve essential knowledge, and establish infrastructure that could survive the gravitational disruptions. They spoke of selecting suitable locations on Earth where their hybrid offspring could weather the coming changes, always in areas that would be geologically stable during the planetary upheavals. What struck Mitchell most profoundly was how the ancient preparation patterns seemed to mirror activities happening in the modern world. The sudden acceleration of genetic research in the past 2 decades, the unexplained construction of massive underground facilities by governments and private organizations, the rush to establish off-world colonies on Mars and mine asteroids for resources, the development of seed banks and genetic archives supposedly designed to preserve Earth's biodiversity. When she calculated the timing based on the Sumerian orbital mechanics, Mitchell realized that if the ancient astronomers were correct, Nibiru should be approaching the outer edge of our solar system right now. The gravitational effects would be subtle at first, barely detectable, except to the most sensitive instruments. But they would grow stronger as the massive celestial body continued its ancient dance toward the inner planets. The tablet described how the returning planet would first disturb the asteroid belt, sending rocky debris on erratic trajectories. It would affect the magnetic fields of the gas giants, causing unusual atmospheric disturbances. Solar activity would increase as gravitational forces tugged at the sun's plasma. All of these effects had been documented by modern space agencies, though always attributed to natural variations within normal parameters. Perhaps most unsettling were the passages describing how the Anunnaki had engineered their hybrid human descendants to be sensitive to these cosmic cycles. The tablets suggested that as Nibiru approached, certain humans would begin experiencing genetic activation, enhanced intuitive abilities, and dreams or visions of preparation. These individuals would feel compelled to seek higher ground, store resources, and gather in community with others experiencing similar stirrings. Mitchell thought about the increasing reports of people relocating to rural areas, the growth of survivalist communities, and the strange dreams that her own colleagues had been mentioning more frequently. Dreams of vast spaceships, of tall beings with elongated skulls, of great changes coming to the Earth. Dreams that felt more like memories than the random firing of neurons during sleep. The orbital calculations suggested that the effects would intensify gradually over several decades before reaching their peak. The ancient texts described this period as a time of both great destruction and great awakening, when the hybrid descendants of the Anunnaki would finally understand their true heritage and purpose. It would be a time of choice, when humanity would have to decide whether to cling to the old ways of thinking or embrace their cosmic origins. As dawn began to lighten the basement windows, Mitchell carefully placed the tablet back in its protective case. Whether the ancient astronaut hypothesis was literal truth or sophisticated metaphor, something profound was happening to our solar system and to the human species. The cycles were converging, just as the ancient astronomers had predicted they would. And perhaps, she thought as she gathered her notes and prepared to face another ordinary day in a world that felt increasingly extraordinary, that was exactly as it was meant to be. Professor David Hawthorne was sorting through his late grandfather's estate when he discovered the leather-bound journal hidden behind a false panel in the old oak desk. It was a crisp autumn evening in 2021, and the Connecticut countryside was settling into that peaceful quiet that comes just after sunset. Hawthorne, a respected historian at Yale, had expected to find the usual collection of family photographs and financial documents, but as he opened the journal and began reading his grandfather's meticulous handwriting, he realized he was looking at something that would challenge everything he thought he knew about how human civilization had developed over the past few centuries. His grandfather, it turned out, had been a member of something called the Order of the Ancient Flame. The journal entries, spanning nearly 60 years, described meetings in candlelit chambers beneath old European cities, where men and women gathered to preserve knowledge that they claimed stretched back to the very beginning of human civilization. But this was not the usual collection of mystical nonsense that Hawthorne had encountered in his studies of historical secret societies. These pages contained detailed technical drawings, mathematical formulas, and what appeared to be deliberately timed releases of advanced knowledge to humanity at critical moments in our development. The journal entries painted a picture that was both fascinating and deeply unsettling. According to his grandfather's careful records, the Industrial Revolution had not been the natural result of human ingenuity suddenly reaching a tipping point. Instead, it had been carefully orchestrated by groups like the Order, who had been given specific instructions about when to introduce certain technologies to human civilization. Steam power, mechanical manufacturing, even the precise timing of railway development across Europe and America. All of it had apparently followed a detailed blueprint that had been passed down through generations of carefully selected families. Hawthorne spent weeks cross-referencing his grandfather's claims with historical records, and what he discovered made him question the very nature of human progress. Time and time again, he found patterns that seemed to support the journal's extraordinary assertions. The sudden appearance of advanced mathematical concepts in Renaissance Europe, despite no clear developmental path from earlier knowledge, the remarkably rapid adoption of printing technology across multiple countries simultaneously, as if the knowledge had been distributed through coordinated networks rather than spreading naturally. Even the timing of major scientific breakthroughs seemed to follow predetermined schedules rather than the random process of discovery that historians typically described. But it was the more recent entries that truly captured Hawthorne's attention. His grandfather had written extensively about what he called acceleration phases in human development. The information age, he claimed, had been the most carefully managed transition yet. The development of computer technology, the internet, even the specific timing of social media platforms, had all apparently been guided by the same hidden networks that had been shaping human progress for millennia. According to the journal, these were not human innovations at all, but carefully controlled releases of knowledge that had been held in reserve, waiting for the moment when humanity was ready to take the next step toward what his grandfather called the Great Reunion. The journal described vast underground facilities scattered across the globe, places where the true benefactors of human civilization continued their ancient work. These were not the crude bunkers of modern governments, but sophisticated complexes that had been operating continuously for thousands of years, expanding and upgrading as human technology advanced, but always remaining hidden from general knowledge. In these facilities, according to his grandfather's accounts, genetic research continued at levels far beyond anything achieved in public laboratories. Not the clumsy manipulation of individual genes that represented the current state of human science, but complete understanding of the genetic code as a designed system with specific activation sequences that could be triggered when the time was right. The most remarkable claims in the journal involved ongoing monitoring of human development through networks that operated invisibly within our existing institutions. Universities, research laboratories, technology companies, even government agencies, all apparently contained individuals who served dual roles, advancing human knowledge while ensuring that progress followed carefully predetermined paths. These were not conspirators in any traditional sense, but rather inheritors of ancient responsibility, families whose bloodlines had been carefully maintained for thousands of years, specifically to serve as bridges between humanity and its original creators. Hawthorne found himself drawn to the journal's descriptions of what it called genetic activation phases that were supposedly approaching in the near future. According to his grandfather's sources, human DNA contained dormant sequences that had been deliberately placed there by our original creators. As human civilization reached certain technological benchmarks, these sequences would begin to activate naturally, gradually transforming our species into something closer to our original design. The acceleration of human technological development over the past century was not random progress, but preparation for this transformation, ensuring that we would have the tools necessary to understand and integrate with the changes that were coming. The journal suggested that we were living through the final preparation phase before open contact with our original benefactors. The explosion of interest in UFO phenomena, the gradual release of previously classified government documents about unidentified aerial phenomena, even the increasing sophistication of our space technology, were all apparently part of a carefully orchestrated disclosure process, designed to prepare humanity for the revelation that we had never been alone and that our entire civilization had been guided by forces that had been patiently waiting for us to reach sufficient maturity. Reading these accounts by lamplight in his grandfather's old study, Hawthorne found himself considering possibilities that would have seemed absurd just weeks earlier. Perhaps human civilization really had followed a predetermined path, guided by intelligence far older and more sophisticated than our own. Perhaps the great leaps forward in human knowledge, the moments when our species seemed to suddenly transcend its previous limitations, had not been accidents of genius, but careful interventions by benefactors who had never truly left us alone. Perhaps we were approaching a moment of reunion with origins that had been hidden from us, not out of malice, but out of love, waiting patiently for us to grow into beings capable of understanding our true place in a much larger and more wonderful cosmos than we had ever dared to imagine. Dr. Amanda Foster was watching the sunrise from her office window at the SETI Institute when the signal came through. It was a calm Tuesday morning in March of 2025, and the golden light was just beginning to paint the California hills in soft pastels. She had been monitoring deep space communications for 17 years, listening for patterns in the cosmic static that might suggest intelligent design. But this signal was different from anything she had ever encountered. It was not coming from some distant star system billions of light years away. According to her instruments, it was originating from somewhere within our own solar system, and it was unmistakably artificial. The transmission lasted exactly 11 minutes and 47 seconds. When Foster ran the data through her analysis software, she discovered something that made her hands tremble as she reached for her secure phone. The signal contained mathematical sequences that perfectly matched the astronomical calculations found on ancient Sumerian tablets. Not similar to them, but identical down to the last decimal place. The same orbital mechanics that described the movement of Nibiru through its 3,600-year cycle were now being broadcast from a location just beyond the orbit of Pluto. Foster was not the only scientist who detected the transmission. Within hours, observatories around the world were confirming that something large was moving through the outer reaches of our solar system, something that reflected sunlight in ways that suggested artificial construction rather than natural celestial mechanics. The object was maintaining a steady velocity toward the inner planets, following precisely the trajectory that ancient texts had predicted for the return of the gods. The initial response from world governments was predictable. Emergency sessions were called at the United Nations. Military leaders dusted off contingency plans that had been written during the Cold War for potential extraterrestrial contact. Scientists were sworn to secrecy while officials debated how much information to release to the public. But as weeks passed and the object continued its approach, it became clear that this encounter would be nothing like the scenarios anyone had imagined. The first direct communication came 3 months after the initial signal. It was not transmitted through radio waves or any conventional electromagnetic spectrum that human technology typically monitored. Instead, the message appeared simultaneously in the minds of every person on Earth who had been working to uncover the truth about humanity's ancient origins. Archaeologists digging in Mesopotamian ruins, geneticists studying human chromosomal anomalies, historians researching suppressed historical documents, astronomers tracking celestial cycles mentioned in cuneiform tablets. All of them experienced the same vivid waking vision at exactly the same moment. The vision showed beings of extraordinary height and presence, their features unmistakably similar to the descriptions found carved in stone throughout ancient civilizations. They spoke without words, communicating directly through thoughts that carried emotions of recognition, patience, and something that could only be described as parental pride. The message they conveyed was simple but profound. The time had come for the family reunion that had been planned from the very beginning. These beings identified themselves as the Anunnaki, though they explained that this was merely one of many names humans had used to describe them throughout history. They had been monitoring human development from a distance for millennia, occasionally intervening when necessary to guide civilization through critical transitions, but always careful to allow humanity the freedom to grow and learn independently. Now, they said, human consciousness had evolved to a point where direct contact would be beneficial rather than disruptive. The revelation transformed everything. Archaeological sites around the world suddenly made perfect sense when viewed through the lens of advanced extraterrestrial intervention rather than primitive human development. The impossible precision of ancient megalithic construction, the sophisticated astronomical knowledge encoded in mythologies, the sudden appearance of complex technologies in early civilizations, all of it pointed to the patient guidance of beings far more advanced than anything humans had yet achieved. But perhaps most remarkable was the genetic component of the reunion. Scientists discovered that the mysterious fusion of human chromosome 2 had not been a random evolutionary accident, but a deliberate genetic modification designed to unlock specific capabilities as human consciousness matured. The dormant DNA sequences that researchers had dismissed as evolutionary remnants were actually sophisticated programs waiting to be activated. As the Anunnaki ship drew closer to Earth, people around the world began experiencing subtle changes in perception, enhanced intuitive abilities, and a deeper connection to the natural rhythms of the cosmos. The transformation was gentle but undeniable. Humans were not being conquered or collected, but welcomed back into a galactic community they had always been destined to join. The Anunnaki explained that Earth had been chosen as a nursery world, where a hybrid species could develop the unique combination of analytical intelligence and emotional depth necessary to serve as bridge builders between different forms of consciousness throughout the galaxy. And so humanity stands now at the threshold of its true destiny, no longer wondering if we are alone in the universe, but preparing to take our place as the newest junior partners in a civilization that spans the stars. The ancient texts were not mythology but memory, not fantasy but prophecy. The gods who walked among us in the dawn of history have returned to welcome us home. Take a moment right now to consider something truly remarkable. As you lie there in the quiet comfort of your bed, you are carrying within your very cells a story that spans hundreds of thousands of years. Every strand of DNA in your body contains the carefully crafted legacy of that ancient intervention we have been exploring together. You are not just a random product of evolutionary chance. You are the living culmination of the most ambitious genetic engineering project in the history of this planet. Think about that for a moment. The 23rd chromosome pair that makes you uniquely human, that chromosomal fusion that distinguishes you from every other primate on Earth, was not an accident. It was intentional. It was deliberate. It was part of a carefully orchestrated plan to create beings capable of consciousness, creativity, and connection to something far greater than themselves. You are that creation. You are that miracle walking around in human form, carrying within you the genetic signature of your cosmic ancestors. And here is something even more extraordinary to contemplate as you settle deeper into your pillow tonight. Of all the billions of humans who have lived and died throughout history, of all the countless generations who carried this same genetic legacy, you are the one lying here right now, in this exact moment, with access to this knowledge. You are living at the precise point in human history when we are beginning to understand our true origins. The timing of your existence is not coincidental. You were meant to be here for this revelation. Consider the astronomical odds that had to align for you to exist at all. Your parents had to meet at exactly the right moment. Their parents had to survive long enough to create them. Going back through thousands of generations, an unbroken chain of survival, love, and successful reproduction had to occur without a single break. If even one of your ancestors had died too young, or never found their partner, or made a slightly different choice, and yet here you are, against impossible odds, carrying the genetic inheritance of the Anunnaki within your cells. But there is something even more profound happening in this moment. As you lie there listening to this story, you are experiencing something that your ancient ancestors could only dream about. You are living in the age when humanity is finally ready to understand its true heritage. The genetic memories that have haunted our species for millennia, those deep longings to reach for the stars, those intuitive feelings that we are connected to something vast and loving, are finally making sense. You are not crazy for feeling like you belong among the stars. That feeling is literally encoded in your DNA. Every time you have looked up at the night sky and felt that inexplicable pull, every time you have watched a sunrise and felt connected to something greater than yourself, every time you have experienced that mysterious sense of coming home when you gaze at the cosmos, you are feeling the genetic memory of your true origins. You are remembering, at the deepest cellular level, where you really came from. Those moments of cosmic connection were not imagination or wishful thinking. They were your Anunnaki heritage calling out to you across the centuries. And here is perhaps the most beautiful part of this entire story. You are not just the product of this ancient genetic engineering. You are also the proof that it worked. Everything the Anunnaki hoped to achieve when they carefully modified that early human DNA is embodied in you. Your capacity for love, your ability to create beauty, your drive to understand the universe around you, your deep need for connection and meaning, all of these uniquely human traits are evidence that their project succeeded beyond their wildest dreams. You carry within you not just their genetic modifications, but also their hopes for what humanity could become. Every act of kindness you perform, every moment of creativity you experience, every time you choose love over fear or curiosity over ignorance, you are fulfilling the cosmic purpose for which you were designed. You are living proof that consciousness can be nurtured, that intelligence can be enhanced, and that beings of flesh and blood can reach toward the divine. As you settle more comfortably into your blankets tonight, surrounded by the familiar safety of your bedroom, remember that you are also surrounded by something much vaster and more loving. You are held within a cosmic story of deliberate creation, careful guidance, and infinite patience. The same beings who watched over early humanity with such dedication are still watching over you. The same love that motivated them to risk everything to help our species develop is still flowing around you like an invisible embrace. You are exactly where you are supposed to be, in exactly the time period you are supposed to be alive, carrying exactly the genetic heritage you are supposed to carry. Your existence is not an accident. Your consciousness is not a fluke. Your deep sense that life has meaning and purpose is not wishful thinking. You are the intended result of the most beautiful love story ever told, the story of cosmic beings who cared so much about potential that they wove themselves into the very fabric of human DNA. Tonight, as you drift towards sleep, you can rest in the absolute certainty that you are loved, that you are valued, and that you are an essential part of something magnificent that has been unfolding for hundreds of thousands of years. You are not alone in this universe. You never have been. You never will be. And so we've traveled together through the vast corridors of time, following the ancient threads that connect our present moment to something far grander than most of us have ever dared to imagine. We've walked alongside the Anunnaki as they carefully crafted the genetic foundation of what would become humanity, watched civilizations rise from their loving guidance, and glimpsed the cosmic family that spans the stars, waiting patiently for our eventual reunion. All of this history, all of these magnificent beings, all of this careful planning and patient love across hundreds of thousands of years has led to this single, precious moment. It has led to you, lying here now, in the quiet sanctuary of your room, breathing softly as the day finally releases its hold on your thoughts, and your body settles into the welcoming embrace of rest. You are not just a random collection of atoms that happen to find consciousness in an indifferent universe. You are the living embodiment of the most profound love story ever conceived. Your DNA carries within it the careful handiwork of beings who knew you would exist long before you took your first breath. They shaped your ancestors with such tenderness, such precision, such hope for what you might become. Every cell in your body is a love letter written across millennia. And tonight, think for a moment about the extraordinary miracle of your existence. Of all the countless possibilities that could have unfolded across the vastness of space and time, somehow the universe conspired to create this exact configuration of matter and consciousness that is uniquely you. The same hands that moved the stars into their positions, that guided the formation of galaxies, that whispered life into existence on countless worlds, also carefully wove the genetic threads that would become your lineage. You are not alone in this vast cosmos. You have never been alone. Even now, as you rest in the peaceful darkness of your room, to loving beings who continue to watch over humanity's development with the same care and attention they showed our earliest ancestors. The Anunnaki who walked among the Sumerians, who taught them agriculture and writing and astronomy, who guided them towards civilization, are the same beings who look upon you tonight with pride and affection. Your sleep itself is a return to something ancient and sacred. As your conscious mind begins to quiet and your body surrenders to rest, you are participating in a rhythm as old as consciousness itself, a gentle cycling between the aware and the dreaming that connects you to every human who has ever closed their eyes and trusted in tomorrow. This is not mere biological necessity, but a sacred journey back to the cosmic consciousness from which we all emerged, a nightly reunion with the source of all love and all creation. Feel the weight of your body settling into the comfort of your bed, and know that this weight is the weight of stardust, of ancient cosmic matter that has traveled unimaginable distances to come together in the perfect arrangement that is you. Your breathing, slow and steady, echoes the rhythm of the universe itself, the gentle pulse of creation that has been beating since the very beginning of time. The story we've explored together tonight is not just history, it is your heritage. You are the descendant of beings who chose love over power, who selected consciousness over mere existence, who believed so deeply in the potential for growth and beauty and connection that they invested hundreds of thousands of years in guiding humanity toward this moment, toward you, here, now, perfect and complete exactly as you are. It's okay to let go now. You've carried the weight of the day long enough. You've done everything that was asked of you, and more. Your ancestors, both human and Anunnaki, look upon you with nothing but love and gratitude for the gift of your existence. You are exactly where you need to be, surrounded by love that spans the cosmos, protected by wisdom that predates civilization itself. Rest now among the stars, knowing you are home,